I grew up in Lagos, Nigeria. I came from a close-knitted family, even though I came from a poor family. But they gave me education with the instruction that this is the tool that will help me to dig my way out of poverty and ignorance. I came without a dime in my pocket. All I had was big dreams, determination to succeed, and the resilience. So coming from another country gave me that insight to be able to understand and deal with people from different backgrounds.
I was walking into Kroger to pick up a prescription for my mom. Upon approaching the pharmacy, I slipped and fell in some liquid. I went to see my regular doctor, and that is when I knew that there was more going on from that fall. I then called Mr. Olawale, talked to him and let him know what was going on. I could just say that he's very professional and knowledgeable about what he does. He's very passionate about what he does, and he cares about his clients. I felt like I was a part of the Olawale family.
The goal is to make sure that our clients will leave feeling that someone gets them, knowing that someone was able to be the voice for them.
We needed an attorney because we needed somebody who understood the relationship between our case and the law. We had been through 4 different lawyers. We were very desperate. We knew from what we had heard that Emmanuel Olawale was the man, who could take us through that experience and see us through and give us the kind of outcome we were looking for. For him, your case is personal. He gave us hope. He gave us encouragement, and we knew that we had found the right man that would see us through.
Just know that when you're coming through the door, you're coming in through a place where you will be accepted and welcome as family, where you'll be seen as a person. At the Olawale Law Firm, we get you. We understand you. Trust us. Welcome to another interesting episode of Legal Angle with Emmanuel Olawale. My guest today is all the way from Texas. He's an attorney who has been practicing for over 30 years. His name is Attorney Ken W. Good. Welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
And thank you for coming. Can you tell us more about yourself?
Well, I really enjoyed the introduction on your podcast. I don't have that background, but I have a background similar in a lot of ways. I have a grandfather, or my grandfather was a sharecropper, and so my mom was the first person in their family to go to college, and so my parents were public school teachers, and they taught us the importance of an education, and they thought that was the ultimate equalizer that could get you to overcome and to excel. And so I went to college. I always, my mom and I used to watch Perry Mason on Sunday nights, and so I had a dream of going to law school, and I did. I went to law school and enjoyed it, was on law review, and did a lot of competitions and excelled, I think some people would say. And then I went into private practice and have been there for over 30 years, probably over 35 now, and have enjoyed it very much, and have developed this practice where I have become kind of an expert on bail issues across the state, and probably in other areas where I write articles and speak on these issues about the different types of release that are used in pretrial criminal cases, and what's available and what works and what are good practices, and what we are finding during this push for bail reform over the last 4 or 5 years that have not worked and have been failures. And we just highlight that as a resource to our legislatures.
Thank you. And what inspired you in the first place to go to law school?
I think it was watching Perry Mason with my mom is what got me interested. I had a car accident probably my last semester of law school, and going through the legal process as a result of that made it not just a dream, but made it something I thought I could do. And so watching others go through the legal, or, attorneys through the legal process, I'm like, hey, I can do this too. And so that's what, when I decided it wasn't just a dream that might not be attainable, it was something that I could work towards as a goal. And then I set my mind to it and was fortunate enough to be successful.
And if I'm correct, you're the first person in your family to go to law school.
Yes, I am the first, but my parents had 4 kids in 2 years and 5 months. I'm 11 months older than my twin sisters, but all of us went to college because our parents were public school teachers. They stressed the importance of it. But I was the first one in my family that I know of that went to law school.
Yeah. And what was that experience like for you?
Well, I think you have to have a sense of humor. You kind of have to put your life on, or to me, you put your life on hold for 3 years because the first year you're learning a new language, and that language is a lot worse than any Spanish you ever thought about trying to learn. The second year, the material is probably harder, but you've mastered the language, so you are able to accomplish or uh, get it a lot quicker. The third year, where I went to law school, was probably the easiest year. If you went to Baylor in Texas, that's considered the hardest year because they have a practice court system that you have to survive. To me, I was on law review. I did 3 competitions a semester. I did some national competitions. I was a member of a team where we wrote our best brief in the nation award. And so I had a lot of success. So it's kind of hard not to have fun in law school when you're having a lot of success there.
Wow. It's hard not to have fun when you're having a lot of success. Then you graduated law school, you passed the bar. What was your first job like?
Well, my first job, I was working. I clerked the summer between my second and third year, and I was very lucky. They offered me a job. And so when I came to work, I graduated in law school in the middle of May, but I didn't have any finals. So I came to town where I went to work and where I live now, May the 1st, and started to work. And I worked all the way up until the start of July, and the bar was at the end of July. And so I was cramming for the bar the whole month of July. And I thought, oh my God, there's no way I can pass this thing. And, you have this period of time where you're like, if I don't pass it, I'm never taking this again, because you're just going through, heck. And so it was probably one of the most stressful things I did. The bar exam in Texas at the time was 2.5, 3 days. And, the last day was short answer essay or list. And one of the questions that they asked me, which, I've used this as an example many times, is, what is a capias? And I had no idea. I didn't know. And so we had been told during our prep for it is, if you don't know, just go on to the next one. So I just put down, it's what Superman wears. And then I went to the next question.
It's what Superman wears. And here you are, 30 years later, a successful attorney. And what got you interested in the issue of bail reform?
Well, when I first started practicing law, I was representing doctors and hospitals when they got sued. And I had an attorney who was training me to practice law, and I consider him to be one of the best attorneys in our area. And in law school, I was very interested in appellate competitions. So when I became in private practice, I continued my interest in appellate issues. So no matter what I've done, I've always been interested in appellate issues. So I did medical malpractice defense. We were on court TV. I went to a seminar one time where they were saying, they had a section on the most recent cases in medical malpractice in Texas, and three of the 5 cases were from me. And I'm from practicing law in East Texas. And then when a bondsman had 45 default judgments, he asked somebody, who do you hire for that? And they said, we need an appellate attorney, and I know just the guy. And so that's what started my interest in going down this road. What made it stick for me is that I think we share a lot of the same values. I think bondsmen in a lot of cases are just blue collar people that have really strong work ethics, and they don't mind putting their shoulder down and just grinding away and getting stuff done. And that's something that really I think has connected with me, because that's what I've always done. You set a goal and you work towards it. And so I think that the blue collar the blue collar values is what drew me to this industry, and is reason why I've stayed there so long.
Okay. So did you represent defendants in criminal courts?
No, I've never represented defendants in criminal court. And the interesting thing is, bond forfeiture cases are considered criminal cases. And so, essentially my practice is all criminal law, but I've never represented I don't believe I do criminal law in the traditional sense.
Wow. And how did you build this area of practice that the bond bondsman, knew that you are the man to go to?
Well, early on, I just wouldn't say no to a case. And so when you're trying to build your reputation, you take pretty much everything, and you hope that you get more good than bad. And, I'm sure I have some stories that were not as successful, or I should not, today I would say, no, you're going to lose that. You shouldn't do that. Where early on, I just wouldn't say no. And so you would get your name out there. And more, like right now, there's 3 people in the state of Texas that have a statewide practice like I do. And Texas is a huge state. So we spend a lot of time on the road traveling and on these issues. And I'll say this, 30 years, that's how you build up a practice, 30 years.
Very good, yes. So can you tell us what zero bail policy means?
Well, there are 3 types of release that are used across the country. First one is just simple release. Now that can have different names. Zero bail is a simple release where you're released on your promise to come back, zero bail. So you have 0 on the bond amount, and they're releasing you based upon the assurance that you'll come back. Another example of what a simple release would be a personal bond. That's what we use in Texas, or in New York, what they would call it is being released on no bond. So they have a certain class of offenses where you would be released without bond. And so I classify those as simple release, where you're just relying upon their promise to come back with no accountability a lot of times. And then the second type of release is the private industry, which is what when we think of a bail bondsman, that's what they are. And then the third type of release is usually a cash bond, where you're posting cash instead of having someone post a bond on your behalf. And so the cash is the surety. And so I think those are the 3 types of releases that we have. And where we're talking about zero bail, we're talking about what has been the impact through these bail reform measures when we increase the use of zero bail or simple release to get people to when we use simple release more and just rely on people's promises to come back to court. And we've always said that the consequences of that would be devastating. And I think what we're finding from COVID was absolutely true. And then we have a report from Yolo County, California, from a DA who has said that's exactly what happened. The zero bail simple release mechanism during COVID was a travesty.
Yeah. Can you tell us what prompted that research in Yolo County?
Yes, well, a lot of times during or right after COVID, there was people that were saying, "Hey, we saw what bail reform on steroids looked like during COVID," but there were no one kept the stats, no one kept the numbers. Well, Yolo County did, and so they had all the numbers, and so they came back in August, I think, several years ago, with here's what the impact of the zero bail has been. This is how much more crime was committed because of the use of zero bail. And so the reason why that happened is because the lack of accountability. When you get arrested and there's no consequences for your fail to appear, then you're just going to fail to appear again. And when you come back, they give you another zero bond. And as a result, you get emboldened and you commit more crime. The criticism from the first release of the report was, well, you didn't do any comparison to the private industry. So in February of this year, he updated his report and he compared it, did a comparison of those people who were released on zero bail with people who were released on surety bail. And the most troubling statistic he found was that there was a 200% increased risk of violent crime from people who were just released on zero bail versus people who were released on the private surety system.
Wow, that is incredible. Do you have the numbers on the percentage of defendants that reoffended who are released on zero bail?
Yes, I mean he goes down to that level and has statistics. I mean, it's 25% increase, 50% increase, 75% increase. I mean, if you go to the PBTX website and go to the download center, both reports are there and available for download.
Okay. Yeah, because I'm looking at it here. It says 70% of defendants released for free reoffended and were twice as likely to commit a new crime compared to those who had to post bail.
Yes, sir.
What could be the underlying factor that will trigger people to reoffend when they've been released for free?
That's a good question. I think let me look at it a different way. I say, why are they less likely to reoffend when they're released by the private industry? And I think that's the best place to start because the private industry still gets family involvement. You know, when somebody goes from a first-time offender to a career criminal, they go through a transition where at the first stage, when the first time they get arrested, they have a lot of family members and friends standing up with them. But as they get rearrested more and more, the first group to fall away are the friends, and then they'll start losing family members. But the family, the moms, stick with them the longest. But we find, or the reality is, they can screw their family enough times that even they won't stick up for them anymore. And that's our career criminals. And those are the people that probably need to be in jail because they will not turn to become productive citizens. But because of the family involvement, that has the best impact. That has the greatest chance of turning individuals around to be productive citizens in society. So without that involvement, and when we take all accountability away, because that's what we did during COVID, we said, if you get arrested on these charges, you're going to be given a zero bond. Well, that's true no matter how many times you're arrested. And the biggest problem that we found is, these policies that were well-intended to protect poor people have created situations where we're tying the hands of judges and we're creating a vacuum where gangs, career criminals, and organized crime can just step into it and make a bundle of money. And that's what we found. I think that's what's been going on. Well-intended policies are setting up a void that is absolutely being taken advantage of by gangs, organized crime, and career criminals.
Okay. Now, is zero bond applied to every and any types of crime?
No, I mean, it's supposed to apply in, like California, it was supposed to apply to the nonviolent crimes. But, the problem that we have in California is, they keep changing what that is. We had Proposition 49 several years ago that changed certain felony offenses down to misdemeanors. And so, like, we took theft $950 or less and moved it to a misdemeanor. And then in our urban areas, the DAs decided, well, we're not going to prosecute misdemeanor theft anymore. And so it became not bail reform and not criminal justice reform. It became decriminalization. And so that has emboldened these groups. Well, certain people get emboldened even more. And now you have stores closing because they can't withstand $25,000 a day in shoplifting.
Then how do you respond to those who argue that if you lock everyone up just because they can't afford bail for stealing something that is less than $200, then you have the jail full of people like that? How do you address, people who believe that only poor people get locked up while charges are pending?
Well, I would say that's true on first-time offenders. But, you know what? I don't think there's any first-time offenders languishing in jail. I disagree that there are first-time offenders languishing in jail because, I mean, nobody is going to hold a first-time offender because that's our whole basis of our criminal justice system. You give the amount of pressure to get somebody to turn around and become productive. So the first time, you don't do very much because you expect them to turn around. But if they get arrested again, then they need more pressure or more punishment. And then again, and then again, and then again, even if it's just $200 each time, if you want them to turn around, you have to give more pressure. And once you have a substantial criminal history, you're not being in jail. You're not being held in jail because you're poor. You're being held in jail because you have a substantial criminal history that it does damage to society.
Then, when it comes to even the cost for the state to house people or to jail people, some may argue that it's not cost effective to lock someone up who has committed a nonviolent crime and a minor misdemeanor, but couldn't afford to post bail. What do you
Well,
say to that argument?
where do you draw the line? I mean, that's really a question on where you draw the line because if you're going to decriminalize theft under $950, which is what they've essentially done in some of our urban cities in California, then you're giving everybody a green light, and that's why you're having these problems. There's a joke going around where a teacher decided, I'm going to apply this type of logic to my class on tests, and so I'm going to give a test, and I'm going to give a curve. I'm going to grade on a curve for a certain number of people. And so the people that tried really hard, they quit trying because they're not getting the benefit. And by the end, everybody's getting an F. The same logic applies here. If you give up on crime, then you're going to have lawlessness. And if you continue to give up on crime, if you decriminalize, then you're giving a green light. I mean, look at Portland. It's the perfect example. We've decriminalized hard drugs there. And so we're setting a record every month for suicides. I mean, it's like society has made a decision that we are giving up on these people and we're just waiting until they all commit overdoses, not suicide, I apologize, but overdoses every month. It's not sustainable. And if we're going to have a society that's functioning, that's able to get along, or we're going to be able to provide goods and services to our elderly that live in the urban areas, we can't continue the path we're on.
Thank you. How about the effect on mental health on crime and then that correlation with bond?
Well,
Do you know if
I think the mental health issue is a big issue. In Texas, some of the biggest mental health facilities in the state are jails. And, jails are not meant to be mental health facilities. But I'm going to say what we're doing now still is not good. I mean, jails create a revolving door for the mental health. They come in, they get arrested, they get on their drugs, and then they get stable, and then they get functional, and then they get released, and they get off their drugs, and then they get uncontrollable, and they get in trouble, and then they get arrested, and they get back to jail where they get on their drugs. It's just a cycle over and over and over. That is not the answer. But that's not really the criminal justice system's pretrial release system. We're just talking about what mechanism are we going to use to get them back to court. If we're going to start talking about decriminalization and all these things, we're creating chaos where you can't get cases resolved, which then just pushes for more dismissals, which just causes more, encourages more crime. So I don't know if I have a good answer, but I know our criminal justice system is working hard to try to find the answer on mental health. But I'm going to tell you, in California, just having everybody live out on the streets where 75% of them have many mental health issues and just giving a green light, that's not the answer either.
Yeah, there's also this argument from the defense bar that when people are incarcerated because they can't post bail, they are more likely to take a plea, even when they are not guilty. What do you have to say to contrast that argument?
Well, when we're taking pleas in Texas, I mean, one of the questions the judge asked the defendant is, "Are you pleading guilty because you're guilty, or and for no other reason?" we arrest people based on probable cause affidavits. So we have probable cause to arrest them to begin with. So this concept of we're arresting innocent people. I don't think that is a pervasive problem in the system. I think if you go to the family violence situations, I think that increases some, because when people separate, they start trying to hurt the other person. I think those cases have a high level of dismissal because of those issues. But I don't think the system as a whole, we can say that we're arresting innocent people and that they're pleading guilty just to get out of jail. Especially if they have a criminal record. I just reject that argument. And the defense attorneys, they're arguing these positions because they know that the longer they put off the case, the more chaos there is, the more likely that their case will be dismissed. So a lot of times when you have defense attorneys arguing these situations, they're wanting more chaos because that helps them.
Then, talking about the Yola County findings, is there any correlation between that findings and your county?
I don't know if I understand what you said. If there's any correlation between Yolo County and my findings?
No, is there any correlation in the findings and your own county, Harris County?
Oh, yes, absolutely. One of the things I did, I have our organization has our own podcast, and we have, I actually talked to the Yolo County District Attorney. He was a guest on there. And one of the things that he told me was that in misdemeanor cases in California, they use zero bail, or they're released without bond. And so he said those cases have an 80% failure to appear rate. And, criminal cases are unique. Your case cannot go forward if you miss. They have to put it on hold, waiting for you to come back to court. And, I was like, wow, because that's the exact same number that we're finding for failures to appear in Harris County, which uses predominantly simple release, but they call it personal bonds, where people are getting released without bond, on a personal bond with no accountability. And if they get arrested again, they get another personal bond. And so we're finding that those cases have an 80% failure to appear rate. And what's the impact of that? Well, the impact of that is last August, I looked at a report from Harris County of what's the resolution for all the cases that were, resolved that month for misdemeanor courts. 90% of them were dismissed. So they're not able to resolve cases anymore. The criminal justice system on misdemeanor cases in Harris County has failed. And the only way they're keeping it anyway going is just to dismiss the cases.
And what's your perspective on this movement nationwide for bail reform?
Well, I think we've had a long push for it for the last 4 or 5 years, and we're starting to see a pushback and a rollback. In New York, they were trying to create they were trying to put in statute the zero bail system, and there was a petition drive to repeal that or to keep it from going into effect, and that passed. New York passed bail reform, and they've gone through their third round of rollbacks. Alaska enacted bail reform, and they pulled it back within 6 months to a year. And so I think you're seeing more and more rollbacks of the types of reforms that we've been seeing pushing for the last 4 or 5 years. And you're seeing more reform like in Texas, which they strengthened the criminal justice system instead of creating one that has little to no accountability. So I think you're seeing a backlash. You're still seeing some jurisdictions that have are one party controlled, where they're continuing to push. And so we're going to have this divide between our states, where there's going to be chaos in some and less chaos in others. And it's going to be based on politics. And until we can agree to take politics out of this bail reform movement, because I think more importantly, it's about criminal justice reform, where they want decriminalization. Until we can get past that, we're going to go through a period of continued, I would say, inconsistency.
Yeah. When you talk about inconsistency, some might argue that the inconsistency is about targeted prosecution. Like there are some people, there are poor people who are likely to be prosecuted for some crime, while those who are affluent might likely not to be prosecuted. So what do you say to that school of thought?
I disagree with it, and respectfully, I think the problem that we have is we have a substantial crime problem in our urban areas. I mean, this is our urban areas. We already have problems with families where families do not stick together. We have problems with schools. Our dropout rates are a lot higher. We have problems with drugs. Drugs are rampant in the inner cities. And then we have no economic opportunity, which chases people to gangs. And so, and it's even worse now post George Floyd, because businesses were burned down and they did not come back. And so I think what we really have is an inner city crime problem. And now we're seeing this push that says, well, we shouldn't be prosecuting. And it's really all a push for decriminalization. Look the other way. And it's based upon this assumption that if we don't prosecute, then they will be better off. And what we're finding is that the gangs, the career criminals, and the organized crimes stepping in and making a killing. The Cadillac Converter is the best example. Shoplifting, organized shoplifting is another, where these organized groups are making money hand over fist over these lax policies. And it's not like this isn't something that has not happened before. We went through this cycle in the 60s where we felt safe or safer, so we started being more forgiving in our criminal laws. And this exact same thing happened, just not as fast. And that's probably because we didn't have the internet then.
Can you talk about the pushback from law enforcement and prosecutors?
Well, I think, California is a good example of the pushback from prosecutors. The Assistant Prosecutors Association attacked, the LADA for some of his policies. And you're seeing that across the country. Now, the problem that we have with the police is police officers is this push for defund the police. And, in the last couple of weeks, we've had some reports showing that murder rates are starting to drop in some of our urban areas. But where they're dropping, it's because they've refunded the police and increased the number of police they have and gone back to some of their practices that some people would call aggressive, but other people would say needed. And so what you're finding is when you have this big push for defund the police, and the public's listening to this. The public is hearing, and what they're being told is you can't trust the police, so you can't report crime to the police. And so they came back and say, oh, well, crime is decreasing. No, it's not. You are telling the public to not report crime. And so during this last few years, we had crime increasing by statistics, even with the defund the police movement. So we've got a shortage of police. We have a lack of trust between public officials and the police, and especially on the police that you public official are going to have my back if there's an issue. And so until that trust returns, we're going to continue to have problems in our urban cities.
Thank you. Is there an alternative to either jailing people for minor crimes or zero bail, or giving them a substantial bail to keep them locked up? Is there?
Well, okay, I'm going to say that simple release needs to be an option, but it's not the solution. I mean, it has a terrible failure to appear rate. So just using simple release mechanisms is going to increase the number of cases that have to be put on hold exponentially versus the private industry. So the more people that you encourage to use the private industry, then the quicker their cases get resolved. And, justice that is implemented quickly is going to get their attention more quickly. But I think also we can't just do across the board punishments. We have to individually assess people. But if you have a criminal record, then you're not being held in jail because you're poor. You're being held in jail because you have a criminal record. If you can't afford a bond because of the risk of your criminal record, then that's not because you're poor. That's because of your criminal record. And we need accountability. If you fail to appear, then it's less likely you're going to get another simple release.
Thank you. You said, you mentioned private sector. What do you mean by the private sector?
Well, when we think of a bail bondsman, that's the private sector. A bail bondsman is someone who has been approved by the state to post bonds, either on their own property or as an agent for an insurance company. So when we say the private sector, it's that's what I'm referring to. And this is something that has been around for 200 years. I mean, if you think about it, the very first types of bonds that we posted in our country is if the person didn't show up, the bondsman took their place. And then soon after that, we replaced it with a financial payment instead of a body payment. But the bail industry, the private industry, dates back to the Magna Carta, because before the Magna Carta, the King of England could hold you while your charges were pending until they were resolved. And if they were never taken to trial, then he could hold you forever. And so the Magna Carta was the first time the king agreed that you had a right to be released from jail, waiting resolution of your case. The private surety bail system, that system, the Magna Carta system, has been encapsulated in many constitutions. It has been in the Texas Constitution, and that's the general rule that's been in the majority of the states. So the private industry is the only way that the state cannot deny you release from jail. Everything else is by statute. So if they give it to you, they can take it away. And so, I think the public doesn't realize we're your only guaranteed way to get released. And if they take that away from you, then it's not very many steps before they can remove the other types of mechanisms. And then we're back to pre-Magna Carta. They can hold you as long as they want. And they're going to do that to their political opponents. And so we've got some arguments about that being now, where we're treating our political opponents one way and our allies a different way. And we don't want that. We want there to be faith in the criminal justice system for all.
Thank you. And how can the criminal justice system ensure equity when a few people will be able to afford the private sector to post bond for them, while others will not be able to do that? How do we ensure equity?
Okay, I would say that the criminal justice system is not based on equity. The criminal justice system is based on what assurance that you will give that you will return for court. So the assurance that you can provide if you are poor is one thing. The assurance that you can provide if you have money is something else. There is one of the federal appellate courts, and I don't know which one it is, but I think it's from the Georgia case, which is Callahan versus Georgia, or there's a city of Georgia. I may be wrong, but it's like the 10th or 11th circuit. But it addressed this situation specifically, that the people who have money, we're diverting people away from magistration, which we need to do because we can't stand the masses. So we want to divert as many people we can. But the people who are claiming poverty, they get special treatment then within 24 or 48 hours, where they get an individualized hearing. And if they meet certain requirements, then they get released without that financial component. And so they're getting a benefit that the other people are not getting. So it's the reverse of what you're saying. And I think that's true. And because we need to divert as many people as possible to the private sector, because the failure to appear rate is so much lower, your cases will get resolved quicker. And simple release needs to be an option for people who are claiming poverty. But this can't be a simple case of equity. If, when we first talked bail reform, it was because, it's unconstitutional. It's going to be held unconstitutional, so we have to change it. Well, it was held constitutional. So then it became this whole argument about fairness, which is the same thing as we have to be equitable. No, the criminal, if you have children, you probably have said the same thing as I have. Life is not fair. We're not in the criminal justice system. We're not going to treat every defendant the same, because if you have a criminal record, you need more punishment to try to turn you around. If we treat everybody the same, then, the career criminals have no incentive to turn around, or we're killing the first time offenders. The whole concept of the criminal justice system is based not on equity, but it's based upon what do we need to punish you with to get you to turn around. And we want to start with the least amount, and we want to build the more the criminal justice system sees you.
Thank you. What happens in a situation where someone posts bond using a bondsman and fails to show up?
Well, okay, so let's compare. So if you're on a simple release and you fail to show up, the court issues a warrant. The warrant goes down the hall. It joins the other different warrants in waiting to be served. And in a warrants division in an urban area would have tens of thousands, maybe 50,000 warrants pending at any given time, which means you have to commit another crime before you're going to come back into the justice system. It could be a traffic stop. It could be murder, it could be anything in between. But when the private sector has posted the bond, the private sector is given an incentive. They are given a deadline. If we can get you back to court within a certain window, depending on what state you're in, then that case will get back on track as quickly as possible. And there's a benefit to the bondsman for doing that. And so the systems are completely different. The bondsmen have an incentive the private industry has an incentive to get you back to court as quickly as possible. The public sector on simple release, all they can do is issue a warrant. It goes down to the warrant division.
So how does the private sector ensure that? Do they go out bounty hunting or?
Depends on the state. There are states where the bondsman can arrest their clients, but Texas is not one of them. So what we normally see in Texas is the bondsman goes and finds them and then calls the police, or they can hire a private recovery agent, which has to be like a private investigator in Texas. And so they can, but even then, the majority of the time we locate them and then call the police. Because you know as well as I do. I mean, if you have an incident during the recovery, then there's going to be a lawsuit out of it. And so you want to find them, call the police.
Can you provide insight into the political ramifications of the argument about bail reform?
Yes. So I'm going to set this up a little differently. So probably 3 elections ago, maybe 4, the Democrats, or we have one party that decided about 6 months before every election, we wanted to get certain of our support mad. And so we would have some type of outrage over some incident about 6 months before every national election. And we would see one party whipping up its supporters and say, oh, you should get very angry at this and you should come and vote based on what's happened. And so for the last election cycles, you would see it, but it was only a talking point during the election. After the election, we'd go back to what we were doing. And, when you whip up a mob, eventually the mob gets mad. So the mob started realizing that. And so the mob started electing people who said, we will do what we're saying. And they have done what they were saying. And so you've now seen where the mob has really kind of taken over. And, you can't really control a mob when they get to a certain point. And so I think the bail reform movement is a push for reform to create chaos, to create decriminalization. I think I do agree it's a coalition. And so the reason why there's a part of it that is very hard left, but there's another part of it that's just good. We want to be more forgiving, and that's what makes it a majority. I think over the next few years, as we go through the same cycle we went through in the 60s, you're going to see the pendulum swing back, probably just as hard as it swung right before it swung left this time. And you're going to see a backlash, and you're going to see the middle switch over to the right side and say, we can't have this. We can't have all this crime. And so I think that's where we're headed. And I was expecting that to happen in the last, November election. It didn't. But what we're going through is not sustainable. So it will eventually happen if we don't change course. You're seeing some evidence of that, where you see politicians on both sides saying we've got to get a handle on this crime problem, but you still have pockets in the country where they're still calling for defund the police, and that's not sustainable. And you can't have a safe society in those locations at this point.
Thank you. And what's the correlation of defunding the police and zero bail?
Well, what is the correlation between zero bail and defunding the police? I think they're both part of the criminal justice reform movement. I think the zero bail is the low-hanging fruit. It's always easy to attack the private industry bail system because, they're got to be scummy. I mean, I talk to bondsmen all the time, and I'm like, you work 20 years to get the great reputation you have. It only takes one thing for you to do something that everybody then says, "Oh, I was wrong about you. You're a scummy bondsman, just like I thought you were originally." And I had a bondsman tell me last week, "Oh, but Ken, you would be there and you would be able to explain to them." And I'm like, "No, I would be the scummy bondsman, scummy attorney at that point." So I'm like, we have to. So I think we're the low hanging fruit. And it makes it easy to attack us, which then makes it easier to do all the defund the police. Let's change laws. Let's be more forgiving. And so I think it's been a building block, starting with the low hanging fruit and then building from there. I think the defund the police is at the end of its movement. I think we still have maybe several pockets, but the rest of the country, I think we're done with that, because you're seeing even urban areas hire more police and take more aggressive actions like they have to have public safety.
Thank you. And how do you respond to those who believe that having zero bail, the only people that stands to profit are the people in the private sector?
Well, this is not the first time that there's been a move to get rid of the private industry. It's not the second time. It's not the third. It's not the fourth. And the private industry's been around for 200 years. My argument is, before we talk about changing the private industry or getting rid of it, we have to have something that is at least comparable, something that can do the job at least as well. Everything that we're currently talking about, even if you're doing a personal bond or simple release, has at the very least a 50% greater failure to appear rate, which means you would need 50% more courts just to get the same number of cases resolved, just based on using simple release. And that's not functional. We can't fund that. We can't pay for it. The system we have would be all chaos. We would have a breakdown in the criminal justice system, and you're seeing that in states that have tried it. And so I would say, to our most ardent opponents, we are an evil that you have to have until you come up with something that does an equivalent job. And then I would say, but we're not an evil. I mean, we're blue collar workers, we're mom and pop shops, and these are great people, that I have fallen in love with. I think they're some of the hardest working people, and they change lives by getting people out of jail.
Thank you. Why did you describe the private sector as the evil that is necessary?
Well, I'm saying that I would make that argument to the people that hate us the most. They should at least be able to concede. They would say we're the evil. And I would say, well, until you come up with an alternative that's at least as good as us, then even in your argument, we should be the evil that we have to have until we find something that's better. And I would say we're not evil, but I think that they should, even our most staunch opponents should at least concede that until they find something that's better. And we haven't been around 200 years for them to ever find something better. We've been doing it for so long. We know what we're doing, and we'll get people to court. We do one thing, we do it really well, get people to court. We just need courts to start caring about whether people show up for court again.
Thank you. And how can people reach you?
Well, if you want more information about our organization, the Professional Bondsmen of Texas, you can see my shirt. I have not been drinking. I don't drink. You can go to pptx.com. We have a blog there that highlights important bail news across the country. We also have our own podcast called the Bail Post. In the last 2 days, we discovered that there was a list of the 60 best criminal justice podcasts, and our podcast was listed as number 8. When I saw the list, I was like, wouldn't it be nice if one day we were on this list? And I looked down and we're number 8, and I was like, yeah.
Congratulations.
Hey, thanks. I don't know if it'll last very long, but I think if that is true, and if we are number 8, it's because we're just trying to educate people on what works and what does not work, and we're trying to provide information. And because I would argue, look, a lot of these reforms are just disasters, and I would argue, what are our politicians in our urban areas doing? What would they be doing differently if they were in the pockets of organized crime and gang members? If they're just being paid off by them, what would they be doing differently than what they're currently doing, because those policies are working so poorly. They're not working. So what would they be doing different if they were in the pockets of those groups? I don't know if they could be doing anything better than what they're doing so badly now.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure having you on the show, and it's been wonderful talking to you.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. And I love your name, Olawale.
Yes.
I mean, I'm just good. I've been just good. I've been
Good.
a good bar my whole life. And, there's benefits in being just good. And then there's all the jokes that go with it. Well, don't you wish you were better? And don't you wish you were a little, I think you're a little worse than good, but
Good is good enough.
I had a law professor in law school, and her name was Phelan. It was spelled Phelan. And then one of the other associates that I worked with, it's my first job, her name was Dick. And so I just thought the three of us should start a firm together. We'd be Feeling Good Dick.
Oh, wow.
Who wouldn't want to hire that firm?
Yeah, well, right? Oh, wow. It's been nice having you on the show. And
Thank you so much
for your
for
time
having me.
once again. And for those of you watching or listening to this podcast, thank you for your time as well. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel on YouTube, to our Facebook page, to follow us on Instagram, and to follow the podcast. Subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. Until next time, stay blessed. Bye for now.